In the concrete jungle of urban life, where millions of people pass by each other daily without a second glance, one moment of human connection can change everything. This is the story of how an ordinary person's simple act of awareness became the difference between safety and danger, between a predator succeeding and failing. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil isn't force or technology, it's simply being seen, being noticed, being human in a world that often feels disconnected. What you're about to read isn't just a story about crime prevented. It's about the invisible threads that connect us all, and how one person's decision to truly see another human being created a ripple effect that saved lives and restored faith in humanity. In a society where we're taught to mind our own business and look the other way, this story proves that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply pay attention. The predator thought he had found the perfect victim. The setting seemed ideal. The timing couldn't have been better. But he hadn't counted on one thing: the power of human awareness, the strength that comes from one person refusing to look away when it mattered most. Sarah Martinez wiped down the coffee shop counter for the third time in 10 minutes, her eyes constantly scanning the street outside through the large glass windows. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the usual crowd of office workers, students, and shoppers moved past in their daily rhythm. At 32, Sarah had been managing the little coffee shop on Maple Street for almost 5 years, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the neighborhood's pulse. The coffee shop sat perfectly positioned at the intersection of two busy streets in the heart of the mid-class district. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where regular customers had their usual orders memorized, and where Sarah could predict who would walk through the door based on the time of day. Mrs. Chen always came in at 2:15 p.m. for her green tea and almond croissant. The college students from the nearby university flooded in around 3 p.m., desperate for caffeine before their evening classes. The business crowd hit their stride around 4 p.m., grabbing their second or third coffee of the day. But today felt different somehow. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it, but there was an undercurrent of tension that made her skin crawl. Maybe it was the way the man in the gray hoodie had been lingering across the street for the past hour, pretending to read a newspaper while his eyes constantly darted toward the bus stop. Or perhaps it was the unusual number of young women who had come in alone today, each one looking slightly nervous, checking their phones more frequently than usual. The afternoon rush was beginning to slow down when 15-year-old Emma Thompson pushed through the heavy glass door, her school backpack slung over one shoulder and her phone clutched tightly in her other hand. Emma was one of Sarah's regular customers, a sweet girl who usually came in around this time to grab a hot chocolate and work on homework before catching the 5:30 p.m. bus home. Her mother worked late at the hospital, and her father traveled frequently for business, leaving Emma to navigate the journey between school and home on her own most days. Emma approached the counter with a small smile, but Sarah immediately noticed something was off. The girl's usual bright demeanor seemed dimmed, and she kept glancing nervously over her shoulder toward the windows. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her backpack for her wallet. "The usual today, honey?" Sarah asked, already reaching for a large cup to prepare Emma's favorite hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. "Yes, please," Emma replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Actually, could I maybe sit here a little longer today? My mom's working a double shift, and my dad's not home until tomorrow." Sarah's protective instincts immediately kicked in. She had raised 2 children of her own, and she recognized the subtle signs of a young person feeling vulnerable. "Of course, sweetheart. You take your time. I'll make your hot chocolate extra special today." As Sarah prepared the drink, she watched Emma choose a table near the back of the shop, away from the windows but with a clear view of the front door. The girl's behavior was setting off every alarm bell in Sarah's head, though she couldn't quite identify why. Emma kept checking her phone, but not in the casual way teenagers usually did. Instead, she seemed to be looking for something specific, perhaps hoping for a message or call that would change her afternoon plans. The coffee shop had about a dozen other customers scattered throughout the seating area. There was Mr. Peterson, a retired teacher who came in daily to read his newspaper and solve crossword puzzles. 2 college students were hunched over their laptops near the window, typing furiously on what looked like a research project. A young mother was trying to keep her toddler entertained while sipping a latte, and an elderly woman was knitting quietly in the corner while her tea grew cold. Sarah delivered Emma's hot chocolate personally, taking the opportunity to check in more closely. "Everything okay at school today?" Emma looked up with eyes that seemed older than her 15 years. "Yeah, it's fine. Just, there's been some weird stuff happening lately. Kids talking about someone hanging around the school, you know? Probably nothing, but it makes you think." The comments sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She had heard similar whispers from other young customers over the past few weeks. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be reported to authorities, but a general sense of unease that seemed to be spreading through the teenage community like wildfire. It was the kind of situation that made every parent's worst nightmares feel suddenly very real. "What kind of weird stuff?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice casual while her mind raced through possibilities. "Just someone in a car who keeps showing up near the school. Different girls have mentioned seeing him. He doesn't do anything, just sits there. The teachers don't seem to know about it, or maybe they do, but they can't do anything without proof." Emma wrapped her hands around the warm mug, seeking comfort in its heat. "My friend Jessica said she saw the same car near the mall last weekend. Same guy, just watching." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had worked in customer service long enough to develop strong instincts about people and situations, and everything about this conversation was setting off warning signals. She glanced back toward the street, where the man in the gray hoodie was still standing across from the bus stop, his newspaper now folded and forgotten in his hands as he openly stared at the coffee shop windows. "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "what does this car look like?" "It's like a dark blue sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota. Kind of beat up. The guy is older, maybe in his 40s or 50s. He always wears a baseball cap pulled down low, but Jessica got a pretty good look at him once. She said he had really pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to follow you even when you weren't looking directly at him." The description made Sarah's blood run cold, though she couldn't say exactly why. Perhaps it was the way Emma described the man's eyes, or maybe it was the calculated nature of his behavior, showing up at different locations where young people gathered, always watching, always waiting. It painted a picture of someone who was planning something, someone who was methodical and patient. "Has anyone talked to the police about this?" Sarah asked. Emma shrugged helplessly. "What would we say? A guy sits in his car and looks at people? The police would probably think we're being paranoid. And none of us have actually been approached or threatened. It's just a feeling, you know?" Sarah understood completely. She knew how difficult it could be to report behavior that felt threatening but wasn't technically illegal. The justice system required concrete evidence, specific incidents, clear violations of law. A man sitting in his car in public spaces, even if his intentions seemed questionable, wasn't necessarily committing a crime. But Sarah also knew that predators often operated in exactly this gray area, testing boundaries, studying potential victims, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. She excused herself and returned to the counter, but her attention remained focused on Emma and the street outside. The man in the gray hoodie had moved closer to the bus stop, positioning himself where he would have a clear view of anyone waiting for public transportation. His body language was tense, focused, like a hunter who had spotted his prey. The afternoon crowd in the coffee shop continued their normal routines, completely unaware of the subtle drama unfolding around them. "Mr. Peterson turned a page in his newspaper with a satisfied grunt, having apparently solved a particularly challenging clue. The college students were debating some academic point in hushed voices, their laptops forgotten as they gestured animatedly. The young mother had successfully distracted her toddler with a small toy, and was finally able to enjoy her latte in peace. But Sarah's world had narrowed to focus on Emma and the growing sense that something terrible was about to happen. She found herself checking the clock obsessively, knowing that Emma usually caught the 5:30 p.m. bus home. It was now 4:45 p.m., which meant the girl would probably start gathering her things soon to make her way to the bus stop. The bus stop where the man in the gray hoodie was waiting. Sarah's hands moved automatically through the motions of cleaning and organizing, but her mind was racing through different scenarios. Should she call the police? What would she tell them? That a man was standing near a bus stop and a teenager felt nervous?
Should she offer to drive Emma home herself? Would that seem strange or inappropriate? Should she suggest that Emma call her mother or another family member to pick her up? Each option seemed to have significant drawbacks.
Calling the police felt like an overreaction based on nothing more than intuition and secondhand reports. Offering to drive Emma home could be misinterpreted, and Sarah wasn't even sure if the girl would accept help from what was essentially a friendly stranger. Suggesting that Emma call for a ride would require her to admit that the situation felt dangerous, which might create unnecessary panic. As Sarah wrestled with these thoughts, she noticed that Emma had finished her hot chocolate and was starting to pack up her homework materials. The girl moved slowly, deliberately, as if she too sensed that something wasn't quite right and was reluctant to leave the safety of the coffee shop. She kept glancing toward the windows, and Sarah could see the internal debate playing out across her young features. At exactly 5:15 p.m., Emma stood up and approached the counter again.
"Thank you for the hot chocolate, Mrs. Martinez. It was perfect as always." "Emma," Sarah said quickly, "would you mind staying just a few more minutes?
I'm expecting a delivery, and I could really use some help organizing the supply closet."
"I'd be happy to pay you for your time."
It was a complete lie, but Sarah hoped it sounded believable.
Emma looked surprised but pleased by the offer. "Sure, I guess I could miss the 5:30 bus and catch the 6 o'clock instead. Mom won't be home until after 7 anyway."
Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had successfully bought them another 30 minutes, though she still wasn't sure what she planned to do with that time. All she knew was that every instinct in her body was screaming that Emma should not get on that bus, should not walk past that man who had been watching the stop with such intense focus. As Emma headed toward the storage room behind the counter, Sarah took another long look at the street outside. The man in the gray hoodie was now speaking quietly into a cell phone, his eyes still fixed on the coffee shop entrance. Whatever conversation he was having seemed urgent and secretive, the kind of exchange that made Sarah's skin crawl with apprehension. The ordinary day had taken a decidedly dark turn, and Sarah found herself thrust into a situation she had never imagined facing. All her maternal instincts were firing simultaneously, telling her that a young person was in danger and that she might be the only thing standing between Emma and a terrible fate. The question was no longer whether she should get involved, but how quickly she could figure out the right way to help. The clock on the coffee shop wall ticked steadily toward 5:30 p.m., each passing second bringing them closer to a moment that would define everything that came after. Michael Torres had been a detective for 15 years, and he had learned to trust his instincts above almost everything else. Those instincts were screaming at him now as he sat in his unmarked police car 3 blocks away from Maple Street, reviewing case files that seemed to be painting an increasingly disturbing picture. For the past 6 weeks, he had been investigating a series of what the department officially classified as suspicious incidents involving teenage girls in the mid-class district. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Young women between the ages of 14 and 17 had reported feeling watched, followed, or generally uncomfortable in various locations throughout the neighborhood. None of the incidents were serious enough to warrant major investigation resources, but taken together, they suggested someone was systematically studying potential victims in preparation for something much worse. Michael's partner, Detective Lisa Chan, slid into the passenger seat with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. "I just got off the phone with the school district's security coordinator. 3 more reports came in today from different high schools. Same description, same behavior pattern, same feeling of being stalked."
"What's the description?"
Michael asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Middle-aged white male, average height and build, dark hair under a baseball cap, drives a dark blue sedan that looks like it's seen better days. Always keeps his distance, never makes direct contact, but somehow manages to make teenage girls feel like they're being hunted." Lisa flipped through her notes. "The interesting thing is that none of these girls know each other. Different schools, different neighborhoods within the district, different social circles. But they're all describing the same guy." Michael felt his jaw clench.
"How many total reports are we up to now?"
17 confirmed reports over the past 6 weeks.
Could be more that haven't been reported yet.
You know how it is with teenage girls, half the adults in their lives would just tell them they're being paranoid or dramatic. The frustration in Lisa's voice was evident, and Michael shared it completely. They both knew that by the time predators escalated from watching to acting, it was often too late to prevent serious harm. The justice system required evidence of actual crimes before they could make arrests, but waiting for crimes to occur meant waiting for innocent people to be victimized.
Have we identified any locations where he's been spotted multiple times? Michael asked.
That's where it gets interesting. Most of the sightings are near public transportation stops, especially bus stops that serve the routes between the high schools and the residential areas. A few at the mall, a couple at the community center, one at the public library. But here's the thing, he seems to move around systematically, like he's mapping out the entire area. Michael started the car and began driving toward the center of the district.
Show me the locations on the map. Lisa unfolded a detailed street map that she had marked with red dots indicating each reported sighting.
When Michael glanced over at it, the pattern became immediately obvious. The dots formed a rough circle around the heart of the mid-class neighborhood, with particular concentration around transportation hubs and places where teenagers typically gathered after school hours. He's learning their routines, Michael said grimly.
Figuring out when and where they're most vulnerable. That's what I think too.
And, look at this, the timing of the sightings suggests he's most active between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays, which coincides perfectly with after-school hours.
Weekends are different, more random, but weekdays are like clockwork.
As they drove through the neighborhood, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time.
Predators who spent weeks or months studying their prey typically weren't doing so for intellectual curiosity.
They were building toward something, planning for an opportunity to strike when conditions were perfect and the chances of getting caught were minimal.
Any luck with the license plate number? Michael asked.
That's the frustrating part.
We've gotten several partial plates, but they don't match any registered vehicles in the system.
Either the witnesses are misremembering the numbers, or he's using stolen plates, or he's switching plates regularly.
Smart predators often do that.
Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it quickly and felt his blood pressure spike. Dispatch just got a call from someone who says they're watching a suspicious person near the bus stop on Maple Street. Wants to remain anonymous but insists it's urgent.
That's less than 5 minutes from here, Lisa said, already buckling her seatbelt.
Let's go check it out. As Michael accelerated through the traffic, Lisa continued reading through the case files.
You know what bothers me most about this whole situation?
The reports we're getting are probably just the tip of the iceberg. For every girl who speaks up about feeling watched, there are probably 3 or 4 others who don't say anything because they think no one will believe them. Or because they've been taught that reporting uncomfortable feelings makes them seem weak or paranoid, Michael added.
Society doesn't exactly encourage young women to trust their instincts about potential danger.
The radio crackled with updates from dispatch. No additional calls about the Maple Street situation, but other units were being made aware of the ongoing investigation and asked to keep extra attention on areas where teenagers congregated. It wasn't much, but it was something. As they turned onto Maple Street, both detectives immediately spotted the man in the gray hoodie standing near the bus stop. Even from a distance, his behavior set off alarm bells. He was positioned to have maximum visibility of both the bus stop and the surrounding businesses, including a coffee shop across the street. His posture was tense and focused, like someone waiting for a specific event to occur.
That's him, Lisa said quietly.
Matches the description perfectly.
Michael parked the car half a block away, positioned so they could observe without being obvious about it.
Through years of experience, both detectives had learned the importance of gathering information before making any moves that might spook a suspect or compromise an ongoing investigation. The man seemed to be talking on his cell phone, but his conversation appeared urgent and secretive. His free hand gestured animatedly while his eyes continuously scanned the street and sidewalks. Whatever he was discussing, it was clearly important enough to demand his full attention while still maintaining his surveillance of the area.
Should we approach him? Lisa asked.
Not yet. He's not actually doing anything illegal at the moment, and if we tip our hand too early, he might just disappear and resurface somewhere else in a few weeks.
Let's see what he's really up to.
Michael's radio buzzed again.
This time it was a different dispatcher.
Detective Torres, we just received another anonymous call about the same location. Caller says she's watching from inside a business and is concerned about a teenage girl who might be walking into a dangerous situation.
Did the caller provide any specifics about the potential danger?
She says the man has been watching the location for over an hour, and there's a young woman inside her establishment who has mentioned feeling unsafe lately.
Caller is requesting immediate police presence but doesn't want to be identified.
Michael and Lisa exchanged glances. Anonymous calls were always tricky to evaluate, but when they correlated with ongoing investigations and direct observations, they carried significantly more weight.
Someone was clearly concerned enough about the situation to risk getting involved, even if they weren't willing to provide their name.
Tell dispatch we're on scene and conducting surveillance, Michael instructed. Ask them to log the time and keep the caller's information confidential but available if we need follow-up.
As they continued watching, the man's phone conversation appeared to conclude.
He slipped the device into his pocket and took a few steps closer to the bus stop, positioning himself where he would have an even better view of people waiting for public transportation. His movements were deliberate and calculated, suggesting he had done this many times before. Look at how he's positioning himself, Lisa observed. Maximum visibility of potential targets, easy escape routes in multiple directions, close enough to the street that he could quickly get to a vehicle if necessary.
This guy is definitely not an amateur.
Michael felt his jaw clench with frustration. Everything about the man's behavior suggested predatory intent, but they still didn't have grounds for arrest or even formal questioning. He was standing in a public place, not threatening anyone directly, not violating any specific laws.
The criminal justice system required more concrete evidence before they could take action.
But Michael's instincts were telling him that waiting for concrete evidence might mean waiting for someone to become a victim. The radio crackled again with another update.
Detective Torres, the anonymous caller is back on the line.
She says the teenage girl is getting ready to leave her establishment and head toward the bus stop. Caller is extremely concerned about the timing and is asking if there's anything police can do to prevent what she describes as an obvious dangerous situation.
Michael made a quick decision.
Tell the caller to encourage the young woman to stay inside the business for a few more minutes if possible. We're going to move in and at least make our presence known.
Sometimes that's enough to discourage problematic behavior.
He started the car and began driving slowly toward the bus stop. The plan was to park nearby and make it clear that law enforcement was in the area, which would hopefully be enough to send the suspicious man looking for an easier target elsewhere. It wasn't the most satisfying solution, but it was the best they could do within the constraints of the law and the limited evidence they had gathered. As they approached the intersection, Michael caught a glimpse of the coffee shop across from the bus stop. Through the large windows, he could see several customers going about their normal afternoon routines. Somewhere inside that building was the person who had called police, someone who cared enough about a stranger's safety to get involved even when it would have been easier to mind their own business.
You know what gives me hope about this job?
Michael said as he pulled into a parking space with a clear view of the bus stop.
It's people like that anonymous caller.
Someone who sees a dangerous situation developing and decides to do something about it instead of just looking the other way. Lisa nodded in agreement. In a world where most people are taught to avoid getting involved, it takes real courage to speak up when you see something wrong. The man in the gray hoodie had noticed their arrival and was already starting to move away from the bus stop. His movements were casual, as if he had simply finished whatever business had brought him to the area, but both detectives could see the subtle signs of someone who knew he was being watched by law enforcement. He's running, Lisa said quietly. Not running exactly, but definitely leaving now that we're here. Which tells us everything we need to know about his intentions. As the man disappeared around the corner, Michael felt a mixture of relief and frustration. They had successfully prevented whatever had been planned for that afternoon, but they were no closer to identifying the predator or building a case that would keep him off the streets permanently. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Soon, teenagers throughout the district would be heading home from after-school activities, part-time jobs, and study sessions. Many of them would be traveling alone, unaware that someone had been watching them, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike.
Michael knew that this victory was temporary at best.
The predator would simply move to a different location, choose a different time, find a different victim. Unless they could build a solid case and make an arrest, they would be playing the same cat and mouse game indefinitely while innocent people remained in danger. But, for now, at least one young person would make it home safely, thanks to the courage of an anonymous caller who refused to look the other way when it mattered most. Emma had been organizing coffee supplies in the storage room for 20 minutes when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of car doors slamming, and what sounded like radio chatter mixed with the normal afternoon traffic noise. She peeked her head around the corner to see Sarah standing at the window, her face pale and her hands pressed against the glass.
"What's happening out there?" Emma asked, moving to join Sarah at the window. "Police," Sarah said quietly, pointing toward the bus stop across the street.
"Two detectives just arrived, and that man who's been hanging around all afternoon suddenly decided he had somewhere else to be." Emma felt her heart rate spike as she watched a man in a gray hoodie walking quickly away from the bus stop, his head down and his pace deliberately casual but unmistakably hurried. Even from across the street and through the coffee shop windows, something about his movement pattern made her skin crawl with recognition.
"Oh my God," Emma whispered. "That's him. That's the guy Jessica told us about."
Sarah turned to look at her sharply.
"Are you sure?"
"The hoodie, the way he walks, the way he keeps his head down but still looks around constantly, yeah, I'm sure."
"What was he doing at the bus stop?" The question hung in the air between them, though both already knew the answer.
Emma felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she realized how close she had come to walking directly into a dangerous situation. If Sarah hadn't asked her to stay and help with the supply closet, she would have left the coffee shop 15 minutes ago and headed straight for that bus stop.
"Sarah," Emma said slowly, "did you call the police?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding.
"I had a bad feeling about that man, and when you told me about the reports from other girls, I couldn't just ignore it. I called anonymously and asked them to keep an eye on the area."
Emma stared at her in amazement. "You probably saved my life."
"I hope I'm just being an overly protective busybody," Sarah replied, though her expression suggested she knew better. "But I've been watching people for years, and that man's behavior was setting off every alarm bell in my head." Through the window, they could see the two detectives talking to each other near their unmarked car. One of them was on the radio, presumably calling in updates about the situation. The immediate danger seemed to have passed, but both Emma and Sarah could feel the weight of what had almost happened. "I should call my mom," Emma said, pulling out her phone with shaking hands.
"She needs to know about this." "Good idea." "And, Emma?
From now on, maybe don't wait for buses alone, especially not here. That man knows the stop, knows the timing, knows when vulnerable people are likely to be here."
Emma nodded, though the reality of the situation was still sinking in.
She had grown up in this neighborhood, walked these streets hundreds of times, taken that bus route almost daily for the past 2 years. The idea that someone had been watching her, learning her patterns, planning something terrible, it was the kind of thing you heard about on the news, not something that happened in your own safe, familiar community. As Emma dialed her mother's number, Sarah returned to the counter but kept one eye on the street outside. The detectives were still there, but the man in the gray hoodie was long gone. She wondered if they would be able to find him, identify him, build a case against him before he hurt someone else. The thought that he was still out there, probably already selecting a new hunting ground, made her stomach turn.
Emma's phone call was brief but emotional.
Her mother, a nurse at the local hospital, immediately understood the seriousness of the situation and promised to leave work early to pick up her daughter. She also insisted on coming to the coffee shop to thank Sarah personally and to get all the details about what had happened.
"Mom's leaving the hospital now," Emma reported after ending the call. "She'll be here in 20 minutes.
She wants to hear everything, and she's pretty shaken up."
"That's understandable. Any parent would be terrified by something like this."
Sarah made Emma another hot chocolate, this time adding extra whipped cream and a dash of cinnamon, comfort food for a traumatic experience.
As Emma settled back into her corner table, Sarah noticed that the girl's hands were still trembling slightly.
The reality of the danger she had narrowly avoided was clearly starting to hit her.
"You know what bothers me most?"
Emma said after taking a sip of her drink. "It's that Jessica and the other girls were right to be worried, but none of the adults really took us seriously.
Everyone kept saying we were being paranoid or dramatic. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Adults often dismiss teenagers' concerns, especially when they can't provide concrete proof of danger.
But your instincts were absolutely correct, and I'm glad you trusted them enough to tell me about the situation.
What if other girls don't have someone like you watching out for them? What if he finds someone who doesn't have a safe place to wait, someone who doesn't have anyone to call the police?" It was a sobering question, and Sarah didn't have a good answer.
The truth was that predators often succeeded because they targeted people who were isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to be missed immediately if something went wrong. Emma had been protected by a combination of coincidence, intuition, and the courage of a stranger who decided to get involved.
Not everyone would be so fortunate.
The front door chimed as Dr. Maria Santos rushed into the coffee shop, still wearing her hospital scrubs and looking frantic with worry. Emma jumped up to hug her mother, and, for a moment, both women just held each other tightly while Sarah watched from behind the counter, feeling emotional about the reunion she had helped make possible.
"Where is this woman who called the police?"
Dr. Santos asked, looking around the coffee shop with tears in her eyes.
"That would be me," Sarah said, stepping forward with some trepidation. She wasn't sure how Emma's mother would react to a stranger's intervention in her daughter's life.
Dr. Santos crossed the coffee shop in 3 quick strides and pulled Sarah into a fierce hug.
"Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing what others might have missed. Thank you for trusting your instincts.
Thank you for protecting my daughter when I couldn't be there to protect her myself."
Sarah felt her own eyes filling with tears. "I have children too.
I just did what I would hope someone else would do if my kids were in danger." "Tell me everything," Dr. Santos said, settling into a chair across from Emma while Sarah poured her a cup of coffee.
"I want to know exactly what happened so we can make sure it never happens again."
Sarah recounted the afternoon's events in detail, from her initial unease about the man in the gray hoodie to her decision to call the police anonymously. She explained how Emma's comments about other girls feeling watched had crystallized her concerns and prompted her to take action. Throughout the story, Dr. Santos listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes on her phone. "The police are still investigating," Sarah concluded. "But I think Emma should avoid public transportation for a while, at least until they catch this guy or until he moves on to a different area."
"Absolutely.
I'll adjust my work schedule so I can drive Emma to and from school. And I'm going to contact the school administration to make sure they're aware of what's happening. They need to increase security and warn other students and parents."
Emma looked up from her hot chocolate. "Mom, can we also call Jessica's parents? And maybe some of the other girls who reported seeing this guy?
They should know that the police are taking it seriously now."
"Good idea.
We'll make a list of everyone who should be informed, and we'll make sure the information gets to them." As the 3 women continued talking, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction mixed with lingering concern. They had prevented one potential tragedy, but the predator was still out there. He would probably lay low for a few days or weeks, then resurface in a different location with a different target. The cycle would continue until law enforcement could build a solid case against him. One of the detectives appeared at the coffee shop door and knocked politely. Sarah gestured for him to come in, and he approached their table with a professional but friendly demeanor. "I'm Detective Torres," he said, showing his badge. "I understand one of you ladies called in the report about suspicious activity at the bus stop."
Sarah nodded. "That was me.
I've been watching that man for over an hour, and his behavior was making me very uncomfortable. When this young lady mentioned that other girls had reported similar incidents, I felt like I had to do something."
"You absolutely did the right thing.
We've been investigating reports about this individual for several weeks, and your call today helped us get eyes on him in real time." Unfortunately, he disappeared before we could approach him for questioning, but we got some good observational data that will help with our ongoing investigation.
Will you be able to catch him? Emma asked. Detective Torres hesitated before answering. We're going to do everything we can.
We have descriptions, behavioral patterns, location data, and now we know he's still active in this area. But I have to be honest with you, cases like this can be challenging to prosecute unless we catch him in the act of committing a specific crime.
So he's just going to keep stalking teenage girls until he actually attacks someone?
Dr. Santos asked, her voice tight with controlled anger.
Not if we can help it.
We're increasing patrols in areas where he's been spotted, we're working with school administrators to enhance security measures, and we're encouraging people to report any suspicious activity immediately. Sometimes the threat of increased law enforcement presence is enough to make predators move on to easier targets. Sarah appreciated the detective's honesty, even though his answer wasn't entirely reassuring. The criminal justice system had limitations, and those limitations sometimes meant that dangerous people remained free until they escalated their behavior to the point where arrest and prosecution became possible.
Is there anything else we can do to protect Emma and other young people in the area? Sarah asked. Keep doing exactly what you did today.
Trust your instincts, stay alert to your surroundings, and don't hesitate to call us if something feels wrong. The most powerful tool we have against predators is community awareness and people who are willing to speak up when they see suspicious behavior. After Detective Torres left, the coffee shop felt different somehow. The normal afternoon atmosphere of casual conversation and quiet productivity had been replaced by something more serious, more purposeful. Other customers had overheard parts of the conversation, and word was already beginning to spread about what had happened.
Mrs. Chen, who was working on her daily crossword puzzle in the corner, approached their table with obvious concern. I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation. Has someone been threatening young people in our neighborhood?
Sarah gave her a brief summary of the situation, being careful not to create unnecessary panic while still conveying the seriousness of what had occurred. Within minutes, several other customers had joined the conversation, sharing their own observations about suspicious activity and their concerns about community safety.
We should set up a phone tree, suggested Mr. Peterson, the retired teacher.
A network of people who can quickly spread information about dangerous situations or suspicious individuals. The more eyes and ears we have watching out for each other, the safer everyone will be.
And we should talk to the other business owners on this street, added the young mother with the toddler.
Make sure everyone knows what to look for and who to call if they see something concerning.
Emma watched this impromptu community meeting with amazement. I can't believe how many people care about this.
I thought adults would just tell us to be more careful and leave it at that. Most people want to help when they realize there's a real problem, Sarah explained.
Sometimes it just takes one person speaking up to get everyone else moving in the right direction.
Dr. Santos looked around the group of concerned neighbors and strangers who had come together to address a threat to their community.
This is exactly what we need more of in the world.
People who care enough about each other to get involved when it matters. As the sun set over Maple Street and the last of the afternoon customers headed home, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. A normal day at work had become a reminder that evil could appear anywhere, but also that ordinary people had the power to stand against it when they chose to act with courage and compassion. Emma would go home safely that evening, but, more importantly, an entire community had been awakened to a threat and had mobilized to protect its most vulnerable members. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness wasn't force or technology, it was simply the willingness of good people to look out for each other. 3 days after the incident at the coffee shop, the entire Maple Street district had transformed into something resembling a neighborhood watch program on steroids. Dr. Maria Santos had spent her evening off contacting parents, school administrators, and local business owners, creating a network of concerned adults who were suddenly paying much closer attention to their surroundings.
The response had been overwhelming and immediate.
Sarah arrived at work on Friday morning to find a small crowd gathered outside her coffee shop, including several people she had never seen before. Among them was Janet Williams, the principal of Emma's high school, along with 2 other school administrators and a woman in a police uniform who introduced herself as Officer Rebecca Martinez from the Community Outreach Division. "Mrs. Martinez," Principal Williams began, "Dr. Santos told us about what happened here on Tuesday. We're implementing some immediate safety measures at the school, but we wanted to coordinate with local businesses to make sure we're all working together." Sarah unlocked the coffee shop door and invited everyone inside. As she started the morning coffee service, she listened to a conversation that revealed just how widespread the predator problem had become. The school administrators had spent the past 2 days interviewing students and reviewing security footage, uncovering a pattern of suspicious activity that was far more extensive than anyone had realized. "We've identified at least 30 separate incidents over the past 2 months," explained Assistant Principal Robert Chen. "Different locations, different times, but consistently involving the same individual or someone matching his description. The most concerning part is that he seems to have detailed knowledge of student schedules, bus routes, and after-school activities." Officer Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed them a map marked with dozens of red dots. "We've been combining the school's data with our own incident reports and information from other school districts in the area. The pattern suggests this individual has been conducting surveillance operations across multiple neighborhoods, learning the routines of dozens of potential victims." Sarah felt her blood run cold as she studied the map. The red dots covered an area of nearly 20 square miles, encompassing not just the mid-class district but several surrounding communities. This wasn't an opportunistic predator who had stumbled across a few vulnerable targets. This was someone who had been systematically studying the entire region for months. "Have you been able to identify him yet?" Sarah asked. "We're getting closer," Officer Martinez replied. "The increased reporting over the past few days has given us much more detailed information to work with. We have partial license plate numbers from 3 different sightings, a fairly detailed physical description, and some behavioral patterns that should help us narrow down potential suspects." The front door chimed as Emma entered with her mother, both of them carrying clipboards and looking determined. Dr. Santos had taken the morning off from her hospital shift to help coordinate community response efforts, while Emma had convinced her school to let her participate in what they were calling a community safety project. "How's the information gathering going?" Dr. Santos asked, joining the group around the map. "Better than we hoped," Principal Williams replied. "Once students realized we were taking their reports seriously, we were flooded with information. Girls who had been afraid to speak up before are now coming forward with detailed accounts of feeling watched or followed." Emma set her clipboard on the counter. "I've been talking to friends at other schools too. This isn't just happening in our district. Girls from 3 different high schools have reported seeing the same guy, always in areas where teenagers gather after school hours." The scope of the problem was becoming clearer by the hour, and it was far larger than any of them had initially imagined. What had started as a few scattered reports of suspicious behavior was revealing itself to be a coordinated stalking operation that had been going on for months without anyone connecting the dots. "The good news," Officer Martinez continued, "is that increased awareness seems to be disrupting his activities. We haven't had any new sightings since Tuesday, which suggests he's either lying low or has moved to a different area entirely. Or he's changing his methods," Sarah said grimly. "Someone this organized and patient isn't going to give up just because his current approach has been compromised." The group spent the next hour developing a comprehensive response plan. Schools would implement new security measures and safety protocols. Local businesses would be asked to serve as safe havens for young people who felt threatened. Parents would be provided with detailed information about recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior. And, most importantly, a communication network would be established so that information about potential threats could be shared quickly across the entire community. As the official meeting broke up, Emma approached Sarah with a request that caught her off guard. "Would you be willing to teach a safety awareness class for teenagers? Not just the scary stuff about predators, but practical things about trusting your instincts and knowing when to ask for help?" Sarah was touched by the request but hesitant about her qualifications. "I'm just a coffee shop manager, Emma. I'm not a safety expert or a trained instructor." "But you're the one who saw what the adults missed," Emma replied. You're the one who trusted your instincts and took action when it mattered.
That's exactly the kind of thinking you could teach other people.
Dr. Santos overheard the conversation and joined in.
Emma's right.
The most valuable safety skill isn't martial arts or pepper spray, it's learning to recognize dangerous situations before they escalate.
You demonstrated that perfectly on Tuesday.
The idea intrigued Sarah, though she wasn't sure how to turn it into something practical and helpful.
What would something like that even look like?
Maybe we could start small, Emma suggested. Just a few teenagers here in the coffee shop after school, talking about what to look for and when to trust your gut feelings. If it works, we could expand it to other locations. Officer Martinez, who had been listening to the conversation while packing up her materials, turned around with interest.
That's actually a fantastic idea. The police department has been looking for ways to improve community education about personal safety.
If you're serious about this, I might be able to help you develop a curriculum and provide some official support. Sarah looked around the coffee shop, imagining it filled with teenagers learning practical safety skills in a comfortable, non-threatening environment. The idea felt right somehow, like a natural extension of what had happened on Tuesday.
Let me think about it over the weekend. If I can figure out how to make it work, I'm willing to try.
As the crowd dispersed and Sarah began her normal morning routine, she reflected on how dramatically her world had changed in just 3 days. She had gone from being a small business owner who minded her own affairs to being a central figure in a community-wide safety initiative.
The transformation felt both overwhelming and strangely empowering.
The morning rush proceeded normally, with the usual collection of regular customers seeking their caffeine fixes before heading to work or school. But Sarah noticed that people were more alert than usual, more attentive to their surroundings and to each other. Conversations that might have focused on weather or sports now included updates about the ongoing investigation and discussions about community safety measures. Around 11 a.m., Detective Torres arrived with news that sent ripples of excitement through the coffee shop. "We've identified our suspect," he announced to Sarah and the handful of customers who were within earshot. "His name is David Coleman, age 47, recently moved to this area from a similar community about 3 hours north. And here's the interesting part, he left that previous community right after their police department started investigating similar reports of suspicious behavior around schools and teen gathering places." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anger wash over her. Relief that the predator had been identified, anger that he had apparently been allowed to simply move to a new hunting ground when the pressure got too intense in his previous location. "Are you going to arrest him?" asked Mr. Peterson, who had been working on his crossword puzzle in the corner. "We're working on building a case that will stick," Detective Torres replied carefully. "Having a name and background information is a huge step forward, but we still need evidence of actual criminal behavior before we can make an arrest. Moving to a new town and watching people in public spaces isn't technically illegal, no matter how creepy the motivation might be." The frustration in his voice was evident, and Sarah understood completely. The criminal justice system required proof of specific crimes, but predators often operated in gray areas where their behavior was threatening and wrong without necessarily being prosecutable.
"What can we do to help?" Sarah asked. "Keep doing exactly what you've been doing.
Stay alert, report suspicious activity immediately, and don't let your guard down just because we've identified him.
Coleman is smart and patient, and he's done this before.
He's going to be looking for ways to continue his activities without attracting attention." That afternoon, as Emma stopped by the coffee shop on her way home from school, she brought news that illustrated just how patient and methodical their predator had been.
"One of my friends remembered something from last month.
She was waiting for her mom to pick her up from the library, and there was a man in a car who asked her for directions. She said he seemed nice enough, but, thinking back on it now, his questions were really specific about what time the library closed and whether kids usually walked home alone from there."
"Did she get a good look at him?" Sarah asked. "Good enough to be pretty sure it was the same guy."
"Same age, same general appearance, same creepy feeling that he was asking questions for the wrong reasons." The realization that Coleman had been directly approaching teenagers, even in seemingly innocent ways, added a new level of concern to the investigation. He wasn't just observing from a distance, he was actively gathering information through direct contact, testing boundaries and looking for vulnerabilities.
Sarah called Detective Torres immediately to report this new information. His response was swift and serious.
"We need to talk to that girl and her parents as soon as possible." Direct contact changes the whole dynamic of this case. Within an hour, Detective Torres and his partner arrived at the coffee shop to interview Emma's friend, a quiet 16-year-old named Ashley who was clearly nervous about being involved in a police investigation. Her parents flanked her protectively as she recounted her interaction with Coleman in careful detail.
"He didn't do anything threatening," Ashley explained.
"But there was something about the way he looked at me that made me uncomfortable.
Like he was memorizing my face or something.
And his questions about the library seemed too detailed for someone who just wanted directions."
Detective Torres took careful notes while Officer Martinez recorded the conversation on a digital device.
Every detail was potentially important, every observation another piece in the puzzle they were trying to solve.
"Did he follow you after you gave him directions?" Detective Torres asked. "I don't think so.
My mom picked me up about 5 minutes later, and I didn't see his car again.
But, for the next few days, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. I thought I was just being paranoid."
Sarah listened to Ashley's account with growing anger at how Coleman had made these young women feel unsafe in their own community. The psychological impact of his behavior was already causing lasting harm, even though he hadn't physically attacked anyone. The fear and hypervigilance that Ashley and the other girls were experiencing would probably continue long after Coleman was caught and prosecuted. As the interview concluded, Detective Torres turned to the assembled group with an expression of grim determination.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we now have enough evidence to seek charges against David Coleman for stalking and potentially attempted kidnapping."
The direct contact with potential victims crosses the line from suspicious behavior into actual criminal activity. The news sent a wave of relief through the coffee shop, though Sarah knew that identifying and charging Coleman was only the first step. They still had to find him, arrest him, and build a case strong enough to ensure he couldn't simply move to another community and start the process all over again.
"How long before you can make an arrest?" Dr. Santos asked.
"If everything goes according to plan, we could have him in custody within 48 hours. We've identified his current address, his vehicle, and his general daily routine.
The district attorney is reviewing the evidence now to determine what charges we can file."
As evening approached and the coffee shop began to empty, Sarah found herself thinking about the dozens of teenage girls who would sleep more safely that night because a community had decided to pay attention and take action. The network of concerned adults that had formed around this crisis would probably remain long after Coleman was arrested, creating a lasting culture of awareness and mutual protection.
Emma was the last customer to leave, staying behind to help Sarah clean up after the busy day.
"You know what's amazing about all this," she said as she wiped down tables.
3 days ago, I felt like I was dealing with this problem all alone. Now there's an entire community of people looking out for each other."
"That's what happens when people decide to care about something bigger than themselves," Sarah replied. "It just takes one person speaking up to get everyone else moving in the right direction." As Sarah locked up the coffee shop that evening, she reflected on how a simple act of paying attention had rippled outward to create something much larger and more powerful than she could have imagined. The next few days would determine whether they had truly stopped a predator or merely disrupted his activities temporarily. But, regardless of what happened with Coleman, the community had learned something valuable about the power of collective awareness and action. They had discovered that ordinary people, working together and trusting their instincts, could stand against darkness and protect the vulnerable members of their society. The lesson would serve them well, whatever challenges lay ahead.
The arrest of David Coleman occurred on a quiet Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after Sarah's first phone call to police.
Detective Torres later told her that Coleman had been found sitting in his car outside a different high school in a neighboring district, apparently having moved his operation to what he thought was safer territory. He didn't resist arrest, which Torres said was typical for predators who preferred vulnerable targets over confrontational situations. Sarah learned about the arrest through a phone call from Dr. Santos, who had been contacted by Officer Martinez as soon as Coleman was in custody. The news spread through the community network with remarkable speed, reaching dozens of concerned parents, students, and business owners within hours of the arrest. But the story didn't end with Coleman in jail. In fact, the most significant developments were only beginning to unfold as the community grappled with what they had learned about predatory behavior and their own capacity to respond to threats. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the original incident, Sarah found herself standing in front of 23 teenagers in the community center's main meeting room, preparing to lead her first safety awareness workshop. The group included Emma and several of her friends, but also students from other schools who had heard about the program through word of mouth and social media. "I want to start by being very clear about something," Sarah began, looking around the room at faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to genuinely concerned. "I'm not here to teach you to be afraid of the world. I'm here to teach you to trust the instincts you already have and to understand that paying attention to your environment is one of the most powerful safety tools you possess." Officer Martinez sat in the back of the room as an observer and resource person, but she had agreed that the workshop should be led by Sarah as someone who had successfully identified and responded to a real threat. The teenagers seemed more comfortable talking to someone who wasn't wearing a uniform and didn't represent official authority. "Let's start with what happened last Tuesday," Sarah continued. "Emma, would you be comfortable sharing what you noticed before anything scary happened?" Emma stood up and faced the group with surprising confidence. "The first thing was just a feeling that something was off. Not anything I could explain to an adult without sounding paranoid, but a genuine sense that something wasn't right in my environment. The second thing was remembering the reports from other girls about feeling watched. When those two things came together, it became clear that my instincts were probably trying to tell me something important." A girl named Melissa raised her hand. "But how do you know the difference between normal paranoia and actually being in danger?" "I feel nervous about stuff all the time, especially when I'm alone." "That's the most important question you can ask," Sarah replied. "The difference isn't usually about the intensity of the feeling, it's about the specificity and persistence. General anxiety feels different from the very particular sense that someone is watching you or following you. And the key is learning to pay attention to environmental details that either support or contradict your instincts." Over the next hour, Sarah guided the group through a series of practical exercises designed to heighten their awareness of surroundings and help them recognize potentially dangerous situations. They practiced identifying escape routes in different environments, discussed the importance of trusting gut feelings even when they couldn't be rationally explained, and learned simple strategies for de-escalating uncomfortable encounters. But the most powerful part of the workshop came when Ashley, the girl who had been directly approached by Coleman, shared her experience with the group. "The thing that bothers me most," Ashley said, "is that I knew something was wrong when he was asking me those questions. My instincts were screaming that this wasn't a normal interaction. But I had been taught to be polite to adults, to be helpful when someone asks for directions, to not make assumptions about people's intentions. So I ignored my instincts and answered his questions because I thought that was what I was supposed to do." Her comments sparked an intense discussion about the conflict between social expectations and personal safety, particularly for young women who are often taught that being accommodating and non-confrontational was more important than protecting themselves. "Society teaches girls to be nice even when it puts us in danger," said Jessica, Emma's friend who had first reported seeing Coleman. "We're told not to hurt people's feelings, not to be suspicious, not to make a scene. But predators count on exactly that kind of conditioning." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Learning to be assertive about your safety doesn't mean becoming paranoid or rude to everyone you meet. It means giving yourself permission to prioritize your well-being over social politeness when the situation calls for it." The workshop concluded with each participant developing a personal safety plan that included specific strategies for different environments and situations. But, perhaps more importantly, they created a communication network so they could quickly share information about suspicious activity or concerning encounters. As the teenagers filed out of the community center, many of them stopped to thank Sarah personally for creating a space where their concerns were taken seriously and where they could learn practical skills without being lectured about stranger danger or told to simply avoid risky situations. Emma was among the last to leave. "You know what's different about this approach," she said as she gathered her materials. Instead of making us feel helpless and dependent on adults for protection, you're teaching us how to protect ourselves and each other. That feels so much more empowering.
Sarah smiled at the observation. That was exactly the goal.
You can't always count on having a protective adult nearby when something dangerous happens. But you can always count on having your own instincts and your own ability to make smart decisions. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued leading safety workshops for different groups throughout the community. Parents requested sessions focused on teaching children to recognize dangerous situations. Local business owners wanted training on how to identify and respond to suspicious behavior in their establishments. Even the police department asked her to help develop community education programs. The workshops became so popular that Sarah eventually had to reduce her hours at the coffee shop to accommodate the demand. What had started as a single act of paying attention had evolved into a community-wide movement focused on collective safety and awareness. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came 3 months later, when Detective Torres stopped by the coffee shop to share some follow-up information about the Coleman case. "I thought you'd want to know," he said as Sarah served him his usual black coffee, "that Coleman has been sentenced to 4 years in prison on stalking and attempted kidnapping charges. But here's the really important part: during his psychological evaluation, he admitted to planning an escalation of his behavior. He had already selected 3 specific targets and was planning to approach them directly within the next 2 weeks." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized how close the community had come to a genuine tragedy.
"Do you know who his intended targets were?" "Emma Thompson was one of them," Torres replied quietly.
"Your intervention on that Tuesday afternoon probably prevented something much worse than anyone realized at the time."
The knowledge was sobering and empowering at the same time.
A simple decision to trust her instincts and take action had literally saved lives and prevented immeasurable trauma for multiple families. "There's something else you should know," Torres continued. "The Coleman case has become a model for how communities can effectively respond to predatory behavior. We've had inquiries from police departments in 6 different states asking about our approach to community engagement and collaborative investigation."
"What makes our approach different?" Sarah asked.
"Most communities wait for crimes to be committed before mobilizing resources. Your community mobilized to prevent crimes from being committed. You created a network of informed, alert citizens who were willing to speak up when they saw concerning behavior.
That's the difference between reactive and proactive public safety."
As Detective Torres left the coffee shop, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a single moment of paying attention to her surroundings. She had learned that ordinary people possessed extraordinary power to protect each other when they chose to act with courage and compassion. The safety workshops continued throughout the following year, reaching hundreds of community members and creating a lasting culture of awareness and mutual protection. The communication network that had formed around the Coleman investigation evolved into a permanent fixture of neighborhood life, with residents regularly sharing information about suspicious activity and looking out for each other's well-being. Emma graduated from high school that spring and was accepted to several excellent colleges. At her graduation party, she pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year," Emma said, "and I realized something important. The reason Coleman was able to operate for so long in different communities was because people had learned not to trust their instincts about danger. Society had taught everyone to mind their own business and not get involved in other people's situations."
"And what changed?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer.
"One person decided to pay attention and take action when it mattered. One person decided that protecting a stranger was more important than avoiding inconvenience or potential embarrassment. You showed everyone that ordinary people have the power to stand against evil when they choose to use it." Sarah looked across the graduation party at the dozens of parents, teachers, and community members who had come together to celebrate Emma's achievements. Many of them were people she had met through the safety workshops or the community network that had formed around the Coleman investigation. They represented a fundamental shift in how the neighborhood approached collective security and mutual protection.
"You know what gives me the most hope about the future?" Sarah said to Emma.
"It's knowing that your generation has learned these lessons early. You understand that paying attention to each other isn't paranoia, it's love in action. You know that speaking up when something feels wrong isn't causing trouble, it's preventing tragedy. As the party continued around them, Sarah thought about all the other communities where predators operated in the shadows, counting on isolation, apathy, and the reluctance of good people to get involved in difficult situations. She wondered how many tragedies could be prevented if more people simply decided to pay attention and take action when their instincts told them something was wrong. The answer, she had learned, was probably more than anyone could imagine. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness wasn't force or technology or official authority. Sometimes it was simply the willingness of one ordinary person to look another human being in the eye and refuse to look away when it mattered most. In the months and years that followed, Sarah's coffee shop became an unofficial community center where people gathered not just for caffeine and conversation, but for the sense of security that came from being truly seen and protected by their neighbors. The large windows that had once simply offered a pleasant view of the street had become observation posts where alert citizens watched over each other with genuine care and attention. And, somewhere in the state prison system, David Coleman served his sentence while psychologists studied his case to better understand how predatory behavior could be recognized and disrupted before it escalated to physical violence. His arrest and conviction had become part of a larger body of knowledge about preventing rather than just prosecuting crimes against vulnerable people. The story that had begun with one person's decision to trust her instincts had rippled outward to create lasting change in how an entire community approached safety, awareness, and collective responsibility. It stood as proof that ordinary people, acting with courage and compassion, possessed extraordinary power to protect each other and create a safer world for everyone.